6 women went hiking alone, into deserts, forests, and mountains, each hoping for quiet or a fresh start. None of them made it back. Through recovered data, footprints, and silent evidence, their final paths reveal how nature turns unforgiving when a single wrong step becomes the last. It was April 21st, 2018, in the Black Rock Desert, Nevada. The desert stretched for miles, a mix of flat sand and low ridges, interrupted by dry washes and scattered rocks. Emily Harris, 32, a software analyst from Reno, arrived just after 8 a.m., carrying a small backpack with minimal supplies, a compass, a small GPS unit, a water bottle, and a lightweight camera. She had been hiking regularly on weekends, but had never attempted a solo desert trek this remote. Emily planned this 2-day hike to photograph the desert's spring bloom for a personal project she had started to document wildflowers across Nevada. Emily had grown up near Reno and spent much of her free time exploring local trails, combining her interest in technology and photography. She often mapped routes carefully before setting out, recording GPS tracks and noting landmarks. This hike was part of her effort to expand beyond familiar paths, capturing landscapes that were largely untouched and difficult for most hikers to reach. GPS and time data indicated she began walking across the sand shortly after 8 a.m., under calm conditions and low morning light. Footprints in the sand suggested a few hikers had passed through the area recently, but otherwise, the desert was empty. Photos recovered from her camera later showed she had paused several times along the route to capture the desert's spring bloom. The ridges and dry washes around her were visible for hundreds of feet. But the desert's uniform color made distance and direction difficult to judge. Loose sand shifted under her boots as she moved, and small rocks rolled down slopes when she stepped near them. Around noon, Emily entered an area of ground known for iron-rich deposits. The terrain rose slightly, forming uneven ridges. She stopped to check her compass. The needle spun without settling. She placed it down and compared it with her GPS, which showed minor inconsistencies as she moved, giving slightly different bearings at times. She adjusted her path repeatedly, moving cautiously over sand and scattered stones. Heat reflected off the desert floor, making surfaces shimmer. Small gusts of wind lifted sand into the air, brushing against her legs and scattering debris from her backpack. After some time, Emily spotted a faint trail. She decided to follow it, hoping it would lead back toward her mapped route. The trail ran through loose sand and small rocks. She stepped carefully, testing her footing on each rise and drop. Her water supply was running low, and the sun was overhead, beating down on her back. Shadows from the ridges shifted as she moved, offering little relief from the heat. The trail ended abruptly at a dry ravine, about 8 feet across and 6 feet deep. Emily stepped down carefully, but slipped on loose sand. Her legs scraped against jagged rocks, and her backpack tipped over, spilling a few items. Marks along the slope later indicated she had tried to climb out on the opposite side. The soil was loose, and small slides showed repeated attempts to gain footing before movement stopped. Later in the afternoon, hikers passing nearby noticed footprints leading to the ravine and scattered gear. They called local authorities, who sent search teams to the site. Using GPS data from Emily's device and footprints in the sand, teams traced her route, showing areas where she moved back and forth, as if trying to correct her course before stopping at the ravine. Footprints in the sand confirmed the path she had taken, including the points where she slipped and her pack tipped over. Scattered gear, a water bottle, a small camera, and a few other items marked the final location. The desert remained quiet as wind shifted across the flats, covering footprints and moving loose sand over the trail. The GPS data provided a record of her movements, but the desert itself had erased nearly everything else. Only the scattered items remained as evidence of her last hours. It was August 15th, 2017, in the Olympic National Forest, Washington. The morning started clear, the forest damp from overnight rain. Emma Lewis, a 27-year-old freelance photographer from Tacoma, arrived at the Storm King trailhead around 8:30 a.m. She had mentioned to a friend earlier that week she planned to take new photos for her portfolio, focusing on forest depth and natural light. Emma was an experienced hiker, often exploring short trails alone. Her backpack carried a DSLR camera, 2 lenses, a phone, compass, and a bottle of water. She signed her name in the small trail register near the parking area, one of several visitors that morning. The first stretch of trail was wide and well-maintained, with light filtering through the canopy. She paused several times to adjust her camera settings and take photos of moss-covered logs and streams. The camera's timestamp later confirmed her steady progress, with photos captured roughly every 20 minutes. Around late morning, Emma followed a side path that was narrow and less used. The area grew denser, branches lowering and the ground uneven. She stopped to take a few selfies for her project, part of her routine for documenting solo hikes. In one of those photos, later recovered from her camera's SD card, a man wearing a dark hoodie appeared faintly in the background, partially hidden behind trees about 30 feet away. Investigators later confirmed he was not part of any group that signed into the register that day. By early afternoon, the last GPS coordinates recorded on Emma's phone placed her near a bend roughly 2 miles from the main loop. The data was later retrieved from the device after her backpack was recovered. Investigators determined the coordinates from stored GPS logs, since the area had limited signal coverage. The location showed no direct trail access beyond that point. Search teams later retraced this area and found sections where footprints overlapped, suggesting she had stopped or turned around multiple times. A shoe print larger than hers was recorded nearby, partly pressed into mud along the same route. Her last photo, time-stamped 1:47 p.m., showed a fallen tree with a narrow clearing behind it. The image appeared ordinary, until analysis revealed a faint human silhouette standing deeper within the frame. Investigators later compared distances and estimated the person was standing roughly 25 feet behind her position when the photo was taken. When Emma didn't return home that evening, a friend reported her missing. Search operations began the next morning, covering the main trail and adjacent areas. Rescuers found her car still parked at the trailhead, undisturbed. A day later, her backpack was discovered off the path, about half a mile from her last recorded GPS location. Inside were her phone, camera, and a small water bottle. The phone had powered off after the final location record. Analysis of her recovered SD card allowed investigators to reconstruct her route hour by hour. They noted moments where her pace slowed, camera angles shifted abruptly, and photos became inconsistent in framing. A few shots appeared rushed, with partial blurs and tilted focus, as if taken while moving. Despite extensive ground and aerial searches, Emma Lewis was never found. Weather conditions over the following week caused mudslides in the area, erasing many surface tracks. Her disappearance remains open, with investigators relying on the sequence of recovered images and GPS data as the clearest record of her final hours. The forest remains quiet around that trail, trees thick enough to block most sunlight. Visitors still walk the same route today, unaware that one of the last photos taken there captured not just the hiker, but someone standing behind her, watching from the trees. It was September 3rd, 2016, in the Tongass National Forest of southeastern Alaska. The weather was cool and calm, with steady overcast light filtering through the trees. Megan Foster, a 34-year-old environmental researcher from Juneau, had been conducting independent field observations along one of the smaller river systems that ran through the forest. She was in the region collecting seasonal data for a long-term study on salmon spawning and water quality, part of a contract project she had been managing for the past 2 years. Before leaving, she logged her route and estimated return time with the State Research Office in Juneau, a standard safety protocol for field workers. Megan was known for her cautious planning and usually checked in by satellite message at the end of each workday. She was trained in wildlife safety and had years of experience working around bears during previous survey seasons. Her pack contained standard gear: GPS tracker, camera, field notebook, sampling tubes, and a canister of bear spray clipped to her vest. Megan started her hike early in the morning, following a narrow game trail parallel to the river. The ground was damp from recent rain, and the air carried the smell of wet moss and salmon. She had marked several water sample points along her route, stopping every few hundred yards to take measurements. The riverbanks were active that week, with fish swimming upstream to spawn. Occasionally, she photographed wildlife signs for her documentation log: tracks, broken branches, and paw impressions near feeding area. By late morning, Megan reached a shallow bend where salmon clustered in clear pools. She crouched near the bank, taking photos of the fish and their surrounding vegetation. The camera's timestamps later showed she was there for nearly 15 minutes. Not long after, audio from her field recorder picked up a faint rustling from the brush behind her position. Megan turned toward the sound and spotted a brown bear roughly 60 feet away. Emerging from the tree line, records from her field notebook indicated she had noted bear activity in that area earlier in the week. She began backing away slowly, keeping the bear in sight, and spoke in a low, steady tone. Standard practice meant to alert the animal without appearing threatening. The bear initially paused, lifting its head to sniff the air. Wind direction shifted toward Megan, likely carrying her scent. Moments later, the animal lowered its head and began moving forward at a faster pace. Megan continued backing up, reaching for her bear spray. She moved toward a spruce tree, about 20 feet tall, and attempted to climb when the bear suddenly charged. The lower branch she grabbed snapped under her weight. She landed on her side, losing hold of her spray. When she retrieved it, wind gusts were moving against her, dispersing the spray away from the animal. Investigators later noted that the area was partially enclosed by thick brush, leaving little space for escape. Evidence on the ground, broken branches, disturbed soil, and claw marks indicated a rapid encounter lasting only seconds. Hikers on a nearby trail, nearly a half-mile away, reported hearing short, sharp cries around midday, but assumed it was an animal. They continued their hike, unaware of the event. It wasn't until evening, when Megan failed to check in with her supervisor, that authorities were notified. Search teams reached the site the next morning using GPS coordinates from her field equipment. Her backpack and camera were recovered close to the riverbank. The camera lens was cracked and the strap torn. Nearby, searchers found her spray canister half empty, along with scattered sampling tubes and a field notebook partially buried in mud. Tracks around the site confirmed a large bear had been active in the area. The section of forest was temporarily closed for wildlife monitoring, but no bear was relocated. Investigators later concluded that the animal's charge was likely a defensive reaction, triggered by close proximity during feeding. Only Megan's recovered gear and documentation logs provided a clear outline of her final moments in the field. It was August 19th, 2017, in the Green Mountain National Forest, Vermont. The weather was warm and humid, with sunlight filtering through thick trees along the popular Deer Leap Trail. Sarah O'Neill, 41, an elementary school teacher from Rutland, arrived at the trailhead around 9 a.m. She was known among friends for spending weekends outdoors, often hiking alone on familiar paths to unwind after a work week. She was moderately fit, carrying a small day pack with water, trail mix, a phone, and basic first aid supplies. Sarah had chosen the mid-length section of the trail, roughly 4 miles total, a route she had walked several times before. The terrain was a mix of compact dirt and gentle inclines, bordered by tall maples and birch trees. Several other hikers were on the trail that morning, but she moved independently, greeting a few as she passed. By mid-morning, temperatures had risen into the mid-80s. Sarah slowed her pace near a stream that cut through the lower part of the trail. She crouched by the water, removed her hat, and took several drinks from her bottle. According to a group of hikers who passed her around that time, she appeared to be checking something on her phone and occasionally glancing toward the trees, possibly noting wildflowers along the edge of the path. 15 minutes later, a pair of hikers moving in the same direction noticed Sarah standing on a flat stretch just ahead of a slight incline. They later told investigators she was upright at first, adjusting the straps on her backpack. Moments later, they saw her stumble, brace one hand against a tree, and then collapse to the ground. They called out and rushed toward her. When the hikers reached her, Sarah was unresponsive, but still breathing shallowly. One of them attempted to call emergency services, but reception in the area was weak. They tried basic first aid, clearing space around her and checking for a pulse. Witnesses said she gasped several times, her breathing uneven before becoming still. Another hiker arrived from the opposite direction and ran toward the nearest section of the trail with cell signal to relay their location to rescuers. Emergency personnel reached the site about 40 minutes later, hiking in from the nearest access road. Paramedics began resuscitation attempts on scene, but there was no response. They continued efforts while moving her back toward the trailhead, where she was pronounced dead shortly after noon. The area where Sarah collapsed was later examined by forest rangers. Her belongings were found neatly beside the trail: her hat, water bottle, and pack. There were no signs of struggle or injury. Witness statements confirmed she had not tripped or fallen prior to collapsing. An autopsy later attributed her death to sudden cardiac arrest, brought on by an undiagnosed condition. There was no indication of external factors such as dehydration or exhaustion severe enough to explain the collapse. Investigators noted that her water was half full, and her phone displayed the camera app open, likely from earlier along the trail. The section of path where she was found remains popular, marked now by a simple memorial stone placed by local hikers. On quiet mornings, the stream nearby still runs beneath the trees, the same stretch of trail where a teacher who often hiked alone stopped to rest one last time. It was October 7th, 2018, in Mount Hood National Forest, Oregon. The weather was overcast, and mist hung low between the trees after several days of steady rain. Rachel Cruz, 29, a freelance writer from Portland, arrived at a small trailhead near Zigzag around 9 a.m. She planned a short day hike to collect photographs and notes for an article about Oregon's old-growth forests. Rachel was a moderately experienced hiker, but had limited experience with the denser, less marked trails common in the Mount Hood region. Her pack was light: water bottle, snacks, camera, small notebook, and a phone with limited reception. She carried no GPS or emergency gear. The forest that morning was damp and quiet. Fallen leaves stuck to the trail, and water dripped steadily from the canopy. Rachel followed a maintained path for nearly 2 miles before reaching a sign pointing toward a smaller connector trail leading downhill toward a creek. The route was narrower, bordered by thick ferns and fallen branches. She continued, occasionally stopping to take photos of moss-covered trunks and shafts of light breaking through the fog. Around late morning, she left the main trail to photograph a small waterfall she could hear but not see clearly from the path. The slope down was slick and uneven, covered in wet leaves and exposed roots. She reached the base of the falls, took several photos, and began climbing back up. The forest above her looked uniform, no clear direction of where she had descended. The mist thickened and sunlight faded under the dense canopy. According to investigators who later examined her camera, the last time-stamped photos were taken shortly after 11:30 a.m. They showed close-up shots of the creek and surrounding vegetation. From that point, evidence suggested Rachel tried to find her way back uphill but veered off the original route. Hours passed. Footprints later found in the area showed erratic patterns, looping in several directions and doubling back multiple times. Broken branches and scuff marks on trees suggested she used them for balance as she moved through uneven ground. She likely attempted to follow the sound of water, assuming it led to the main trail, but the creek split into smaller channels, making orientation difficult. As daylight faded, Rachel tripped on exposed roots and fell, scraping her arms and legs on the forest floor. Her camera strap tore, and the lens cracked against a rock. Investigators later found small traces of blood and disturbed soil at the site, indicating she may have rested briefly before moving again. Other hikers in the area recalled hearing faint calls that afternoon, but couldn't pinpoint direction through the dense forest and echoing terrain. By nightfall, light rain had returned, and temperatures dropped into the low 40s. Rachel's car remained parked at the trailhead overnight. When she didn't return home, a missing person report was filed early the next morning. Search and rescue teams began grid sweeps of the forest using dogs and aerial drones, but visibility was poor. Wet conditions and thick canopy made detection difficult. After 3 days, a volunteer search team located fragments of her clothing near a steep ravine about a mile off the main trail. A week later, partial remains were found roughly 300 yards farther downslope, along with her damaged camera and a small notebook containing short, handwritten notes about tree species and lighting conditions. Authorities concluded Rachel likely became disoriented after leaving the marked trail, continuing deeper into the forest as she attempted to find her way back. Weather conditions, low visibility, and fatigue contributed to her disorientation. The area was later marked with additional trail signs and caution notices for hikers. It was July 15th, 2018, in the Chattahoochee National Forest, Georgia. The morning was heavy with humidity after a night of summer rain. Trails were soft and slick, with patches of mud collecting beneath fallen branches. Ashley Morales, 26, had driven from Atlanta that morning. Friends later said she had recently gone through a breakup and decided to spend the weekend hiking alone to clear her thoughts. She was new to hiking and had found the trail online the night before. She packed lightly, one bottle of water, her phone, and a small rope she kept in her trunk from an old camping kit. Ashley arrived at the trailhead just before 10 a.m. and signed her name in the small register by the map board. She wore running shoes instead of boots and carried her backpack loosely strapped. The first mile was calm, the trail weaving through a canopy of oak and pine. Water still dripped from the leaves, and insects moved across the mud. Other hikers recalled seeing her early on, walking slowly and stopping often to take photos. By late morning, she reached a section where several trees had fallen across the path. The ground there sloped slightly, with slick soil and clusters of vines stretching between trunks. According to investigators, boot prints later found near the area showed she had tried to move around the obstruction, but circled back several times, likely looking for a safer route. The vines covering the trees were thick, some as wide as a finger, and tangled in several layers. At some point, Ashley attempted to climb over one of the fallen trees. Evidence at the site, disturbed bark, broken vines, and a single shoe print pressed deep into the mud, showed she lost footing and slipped down the side of the trunk. The vines underneath had grown into dense coils that tightened when disturbed. Investigators concluded she became trapped after her legs slid through an opening and twisted among the stems. Marks on the surrounding soil indicated she had tried repeatedly to pull free, using her hands and the small rope from her bag. She likely tied the rope around the thicker vines in an attempt to loosen them, but the knots were later found cinched tight. The forest floor was steep and uneven, making it difficult to shift position once wedged. By early afternoon, temperatures rose into the high 80s, and the humidity remained heavy. Other hikers passed along nearby trails but didn't notice anything unusual. It wasn't until late in the day that a couple walking back toward the trailhead spotted a dark-colored backpack and a length of rope lying across the path about 40 feet from the fallen tree. Thinking someone had dropped their gear, they left it at the trail register. When Ashley didn't return home that night, her roommate reported her missing. Search teams began early the next morning. The trail was easy to follow until it reached the area of fallen trees. There, rescuers found signs of a struggle, mud displaced in wide patterns and pieces of torn fabric. Her body was discovered several feet downslope, still partially entangled in the vines. Investigators determined she had likely been trapped for several hours before exhaustion and heat overcame her. Data recovered from her phone showed multiple unsent text messages between 1 p.m. and 2:30 p.m., each indicating she was attempting to call for help, but no signal had connected. The forest section was later cleared and remarked by park maintenance. Today, hikers still pass through that shaded bend of trail, where a simple post with a small metal tag marks the point of the accident, one that began with a slip on wet ground and ended quietly among the vines. Thanks for watching. Enjoy this video? Click more